Okay, I'm also going to start that bit of the conversation again, A, because Biljana's just joined us, but B, because I want to record this session. So bear in mind everything that we're talking about is going to be recorded. A, it means I can send it out to you if you want a refresher, and B, if anyone has RSVP to come in and they can't actually make it on the day, we'll send them the recording. But you guys will get the professional development points. Yay for you. Okay, so what I was saying before I set the recording on was when the class spaces were designed and the Moodle team does all of their work, they have kind of pre-formatted ways in which they can set things up, including for marking. So there's one particular box that they've used for the area in the class space where you say that, yes, the students have done their forms in Sonia, or no, they haven't. But unfortunately, the only one they could use had satisfactory, not satisfactory, and outstanding. And any normal person would look at outstanding and think, wow, outstanding, that means I've done a really brilliant job. But it doesn't actually mean that. It means the forms haven't been submitted. They're standing outside of the class space. Anyone who did, I actually wish I had the microphones on because there's so many people laughing. Anyone who did grade the students as outstanding, we got what you meant, because I didn't even realize that that was a differentiation. So all of those students have been passed, it's fine. But for next term, please just tick satisfactory, as in they have submitted the forms. Not satisfactory, as in they've submitted a form that's not signed, or they've done something wrong. Karen Efron, control yourself. Thank you. And if they haven't done the forms, if they haven't been put in, then yes, do mark them down as outstanding. But really what we want is for you to be chasing them up and letting them know you've got forms that need to go in. We have to have these in urgently by the end of term, or we either can't pass you on to start the next supervision term, or you're not going to have your paperwork done in order to graduate. So that's the stick that we hit them with. So that's the first thing. Secondly, last term, almost everyone, and certainly everyone in this group, had all of their essays marked and in and on time, and the paperwork was done. It was beautiful from my point of view. At the end of term, I'm often going through and looking to see who's still got outstanding work, which students haven't submitted stuff. I sent out a couple of reminders to you guys this time, and absolutely there was so much done by the time term finished. The only things that weren't graded in the grade book were students who still had extensions. A couple of terms ago, Dennis sort of had a bit of a word with me about there were quite a few that hadn't been ticked off by the time we had examination committee, and he has absolutely nothing to complain about this time. It was really spectacular. So thanks very much for getting all of that in. Made my life really joyful. Okay, what else? Halfway through the term, you do a feedback form on supervisees where you tick them off on how their presentations have been. And it's long been a problematic assessment, because you can either tick them as satisfactory or not satisfactory. And if they're not doing something, they get graded as not satisfactory. We even have a sort of pro forma letter that we ask you to kind of work into the feedback, which will say something like, Enza, at this stage in the term, I can't grade you as satisfactory because you haven't been able to demonstrate that you can show case conceptualization. You've only had one attempt at it so far. You didn't quite come to class adequately prepared. So over the next few weeks together, I want you to work on making sure your notes are prepared. Any questions about ethics, we're going to work on that together. By the end of the term, I'm confident that you will pass the unit. And the students don't see that. They just see unsatisfactory. And it puts them into a complete state of panic. It really does set up a very problematic dynamic for you guys to manage. We worked out that approach over a few terms when we had so many students unable to pass that assessment, or supervisors just not comfortable about marking overall satisfactory if a student wasn't able to demonstrate those particular skills. So we are going to go to curriculum committee and hopefully have that marking matrix changed. So it will now say satisfactory, not satisfactory, or unable to be graded at this point. Now that will take a little while to happen because curriculum committee doesn't meet for 2 weeks and then it's all going to be signed off. Can I suggest as a workaround for this term, you tick satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or NA. So just type in NA and then down the bottom put not able to be assessed at this point. Now, if they get 3 satisfactories and 5 NAs, they can still be graded as satisfactory. If what they have done up until this point in the term is good, then that's good. If they are turning up, if they have got their notes prepared, that's fine. If they're turning up but they're unprepared, you may give them an unsatisfactory for that. The tricky part, and the unit outline doesn't really explain which way we need to go on this. Do students need to pass all of the assessment tasks? Or do they just need to have passed the final review of their practice by the end of term? That's the way we've been working so far. So students can be graded as unsatisfactory in that first one. As long as they're satisfactory by the end of the term, we're happy with them. So at this stage, err on the side of being generous. Certainly if they have done 2 case conceptualizations and they've got no idea what they're talking about and they turn up with no notes whatsoever and they're clearly unethical, fail them on that. But they will, we can't have them failing that unit and then failing that assessment and then failing the entire unit. That's just unfair. They've got to be able to show that they can come up to standard by the end of the term. So that's a change that we'll work on at a sort of structural level in terms of the marking rubric. But for now, let's just have this work around satisfactory, unsatisfactory, not yet able to be graded. And as I say, if they've got unable to be graded but otherwise satisfactory, grade them overall as satisfactorily passing the assessment. I think that will reduce a lot of anxiety. What else? Okay. Someone contacted me last term and said something about the 30-minute one-on-one session at the end of term, and I thought, does your unit have that? And I went through, and there are massive errors in the class spaces, and they've actually been there for a while, and I hadn't realized it. At some stage, someone, as they've cloned units from one term to another, has changed some of the content. The only unit that requires a 30-minute one-on-one session is COUN 3031, the first supervision session in the undergrad. So if you're doing a class that runs for 3 hours fortnightly, that's the only one where they get the one-on-one session. All of the others, please just proceed as normal. As it is in COUN 3031 and FPS 1, the grad dip equivalent, first week is largely setting up, getting to know each other, finding out what your style of supervision is, finding out about their agency, what your expectations of them are, etc. Generally, students aren't presenting in that week. So they've only got the next 2 weeks and next 2 fortnights until the end of term. Then they've only got 2 more attempts in the second half of term, and then there's the one-on-one. For all of the others, please use all of those times to get as many examples of case conceptualization and client presentation as you can. This came up in professional development today, and a couple of the staff said, actually, I really like having that time to give one-on-one feedback. So we're not completely wedded to not having the 30 minutes there. It's just that at the moment, the unit outlines for all of the units say that you'll have 2 hours for the grad dip and the masters, or 3 hours in the bachelor's for the entire duration, except for that first supervision unit, where you'll have 5 units of 3 hours and 1 of 30 minutes each. If you have strong feelings either way, please email me and we'll work out how that discussion occurs. My problem with it is I think in the masters, it's a little redundant to do a one-on-one session to give them more specific feedback when those students are presumably already in practice. They really shouldn't need that one-on-one attention. In the grad dip, the problem there is you have 5 students in a 2-hour period. You can't give them 30 minutes each. You're already 30 minutes over time to do that without any starting or finishing to the unit. So at this stage, we really need to fall back on what the unit outline says, and that's only 30 minutes one-on-one for COUN 3031, Counselling, Placement and Supervision 1. Okay. Please remember to take the roles electronically on the day that you do your supervision session. Most people are doing this really, really well. We did have a couple of cases, and it may actually have been back in the last term that I was looking at them, when not all of the roles were ticked off. And it's really hard to ensure that the students are claiming for the correct number of hours if we haven't got that record electronically. And it's also really important to do it as soon as possible. If students do miss more than 80%, or if they fail to attend more than 80%, there'll be an automatic email sent out. So they may have missed one and you've marked them down as absent, and then they may have turned up for the rest, but it's 3 weeks since you've ticked the role. This system will automatically generate an email that says you are now at risk of failing for non-attendance. And again, that's the kind of thing that will elevate them and put them into a bit of a state of panic. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to look at my notes for a moment. Right. PACFA, when they're looking at how courses are designed by higher ed providers, stipulate that there must be 10 hours of supervision. So in the grad dip and the masters, we do 36 hours. In the bachelors, we do about 54. So we're massively oversupplying what we need to do, which I have to say, that's something I'm really proud of, because we lose money hand over fist running these units. Even if your classes are full, they're only just, in fact, they're under our break-even point. So the fact that we're providing a lot more hours than we need to in small, really focused classes says a lot about how seriously the School of Counselling takes supervision. So I'm really happy that we do that. We do have an 80% attendance requirement, but a student can fall below that 80% and yet still have enough hours to satisfy PACFA. So we want to have a little bit of flexibility, and this is something that we have communicated with you by email before. I just want to run through it again. If a student misses one session in the fortnightly classes or 2 sessions in the weekly classes, they're fine. They're still at the 80%. If they miss a second session in the fortnightly or a third session in the weekly classes, they're now at risk of being below, well, they are actually below 80%. We will allow them to miss that extra one, but there are parameters around that. There has to be a reason. It can't just be, I was tired, I couldn't be asked logging on. That's an absence, and that's really problematic, and that shows a lack of dedication and ethical practice. If there's an emergency at work and they're called back, if they have a sick child, partner, parent, vet emergency, obviously we're going to be happy with that. But what we do want from them is a bit more work. So normally we're asking 150 to 300 words per time on the blogs. If a supervisee misses a session, make contact with them and just say, okay, how's the week been at placement? Nothing major coming up. Okay, just reflect about what's happened. Go into a bit more depth, push them to maybe 1,000 words. If something has come up, I'll leave that to your discretion as to whether or not you want an email conversation, whether or not you want a quick phone call with them to debrief. Bear in mind, we're not paying you that extra, even though we know you do extra on top of the work, but we're not paying you to phone students up. So if someone's missing every other week, I don't think it's justifiable that we ask you to do that, because there's no remuneration for it. If it's something that's isolated and discrete and not a major issue that you can chat through in 10 minutes, I think that's okay. If it's a more serious issue, if they are upset and they really do need some work with a supervisor, then in that case, get them to contact us. What we're trying to do, and we're just a little hamstrung by HR at the moment, is to come up with an emergency supervisor, which will be a staff member who's on call, probably from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. We need to find out how they're going to be remunerated, what we pay them per hour if they are called out, who pays for their mobile phone, all of that kind of fairly dull stuff that HR need to have in place before we can do this. So hopefully by term 2, we'll have an emergency clinician who's available. I'm not saying that the student will text and get a call back straight away, but it will be someone who will call them within a day. If they contact you and say, I'm in a complete state and you're not in a position to mentor them through that, they can go to Lifeline. If they're so upset, there are emergency services that will support them. If it's something small that you can manage, fine. If it's something bigger and they say, look, I really need an hour, I need to go through this in depth, I'm quite upset, then let them know, okay, the emergency supervisor, whoever that may be, will be in contact before close of business tomorrow. So let them know that that support will be forward-coming. Okay, I think the last thing that I want to talk about, just in terms of practicalities, is a change that we will have in place by term 2. We won't have time to get it done by term 1, but one of the either students or supervisors was saying, the blogs are fine, but it's really hard to write something on the placement agency when you've been there for 9 months. So when it comes to going through this with curriculum committee, I'm going to recommend that we only have 2 blogs, one on their client work, and the students can talk about the agency in that, and one on their work with you guys as their clinical supervisors. I think the blog about the agency is all well and good if a student is just getting their feet around it, finding out who funds it, what their philosophy is, what the style of the work that the various staff do. That's fine for a couple of weeks, but after that, it's going to be getting blood out of a stone to say, okay, come on, we want 300 words on what else you learnt on the agency that you've been turning up at once a week for the last 9 months. So I think that will take some of the pressure off the supervisees. By and large, they don't mind doing the blogs, but I think they will mind if it's one that's if it just feels repetitive. So we will get rid of that. They kind of have to do it for this term simply because it is in there, but let them know that if there's nothing really new about the blog, about the placement agency, focus on the client work, focus on the interaction with supervisors. So that's it for the practical stuff. Now I'm just wanting a more general talk from you guys about managing difficult students, because this comes up every term. Luckily, it doesn't come up too often. We have about 300 students who go through supervision every term. Of those, I'd say 10 are difficult. Of those, 6 resolve by you guys and the student having a bit of back and forth, and the students will often come to a moment of realization and everything will start to click, and they'll sometimes go as far as contacting me or contacting you at the end of term and saying, that was really hard. At times that was really challenging. At times I was quite angry. And by the end, I have a real clarity about what I'm supposed to be doing here. And now I know why the supervisor kept pushing me in that direction. Out of the remaining small percentage, some of them are very difficult, and it takes up a huge amount of your emotional energy, our time, our emotional energy, because we're aware of how stressful it is for the supervisors. It's stressful for the supervisees if they really don't know any better. So I want to open the mics up to whoever wants to have a chat about how are the ways that you can identify a student where you think things are going to go wrong. How do you manage that? What do you do if it's really going down the tubes? At what stage do you bring the school in, etc.? I've got some comments that came through from this question when I raised it in the previous week in PD. But any comments or ideas from the people who are present here? Just put your hand up and I'll unmute you, or unmute yourself if you know how to do that. Karen. Yep, go ahead, Karen.
Muted, Paul. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This is more, I suppose, I just wanted to bring up, I think, what's quite a sort of a delicate balance when there's an issue. I know what's happened for me, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but when I have a student who in a supervision group is coming to my attention because I've got some concern about how they are in the actual group, yeah, what automatically comes to mind for me is I wonder how they are on their placement. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So are they just like this is in supervision? How does it show itself in placement? So I know one of the first things that comes up for me as a supervisor is that's a question that I have, yeah, when I identify, you know, a concern, yeah, and I'm never quite sure, Paul, whether to, you know, how much I should be. I know I don't initiate contact with the agency, but how much perhaps I should be initiating contact with ACAP and saying, look, I've got some concern about this student. Can you check out for me what's happening on their placement? So I'm not quite sure how to bring those things together, and at what point to bring those things together.
Okay, and I have no answer that's going to fit every case, of course.
Yeah.
What I would say is the minute you start to get any suspicion about a student's reactivity or lack of skill capacity, document everything. Document every conversation. If things do come to appeal, the more evidence that you have got, and I'm not sort of saying that people get played off against each other, but the stronger a position that you've got to be able to say, this student presented in this way on this date, and I questioned them on this, and they raised their voice, or they argued and would not take any direction whatsoever. Keep lots of detail about that. If it's a one-off, that's fine. If you think this is a pattern, if you think this is going somewhere that I'm not comfortable with, email to me straight away. And that way, again, we've got a record of what's going on. That would definitely go to supervision of the supervisors. If it's something that's weighing on your mind, then we can provide supervision sooner rather than waiting for that to come up in weeks 4, 7, or 11. It won't be Kathy from now on because she's now academic head of campus in Sydney. So she's just not going to have the bandwidth to do this, which she's a little bit gutted by because she really enjoyed working with this team. But whoever, in an emergency, yes, she would certainly be there to talk through. But otherwise, whoever else is going to be taking over supervision of the supervisors would be there as your backup. Not sure who that's going to be. Possibly John Metyard from the Brisbane campus, but he's very part-time. And supervision of the supervisors is a fairly hefty piece of work in each term. So yeah, in short, as soon as you think this is a problem, contact us, but certainly do document. In terms of how they are in placement, that would again come through us. It's the school's position that there's no contact between the clinical supervisor and the placement agency. I'm not sure why that is, maybe just to minimise the time that's taken up with the agencies, because we have to maintain relationships with them, and it's not as if they're fractious relationships, but we're just very much aware of not taking up too much of their time. So the placement coordinators might be able to get a good grip on what's going on and feed that back to you. This ties into one of the other important parts in this conversation. We talk about the confidentiality loop, And that's you as the supervisor, everyone in the supervision group, because they're obviously hearing what's going on, Kathy's new equivalent, Dennis as head of school, me as head of supervision, Dee as head of placement. I would make an argument that whoever is going to supervise next is part of that supervision group. So I know you and I have spoken about one particular student, Karen. Maybe that's information that would be beneficial for whoever's coming on next. And it's that ethical line between confidentiality versus the term's gone right out of my head, not feedback, handover. If you're in practice and you're going on sabbatical for 6 months, you do a handover with your clients. So why would there not be a handover from one supervisor to another? So we need to finish finessing that conversation here at school. Is this something where we need to say to the supervisees up front, here's the confidentiality loop, and there will be handover to the next supervisor? I wouldn't say, and if you do anything wrong or you're aggressive or you're reactive, we'll be telling the next supervisor. Just make it a general statement that you will be part of a process that will include the next supervisor, whether or not they even need access to the essays written. If they do want to come back and look at that, I don't know. Again, that's something that needs to be discussed with all the sort of discipline heads and Dennis. Okay, so in short, keep notes, contact us. How are other people going, and what are techniques they have for identifying or managing the difficult ones? Okay, Annie, who is joining us from India.
Hi, sorry, I've got some background noise, which I hope won't be too bad. So I'll keep this brief. I think one thing I struggle with is the risk of shaming. So if I have a difficult student, knowing how to deal with that within the group and knowing at which point to take it offline and to talk to them outside the group. I'll leave it at that. So I don't know if anyone's got any ideas or thoughts about that.
Look, that's a really good point. Obviously, we have the groups, and that's where the majority of the work occurs, but you do have the discretion to have that private conversation. At the end of the 3031 unit, there is that ability to have 30 minutes one-on-one, but that's right at the end of term. I think if you do want to intervene earlier and say to the student, I don't think I would say it in the supervision group because it's already identifying that there's an issue, but get to the end of the group, send them a text, send them an email and say, I'd really like to have a talk about how you manage that student or that client. And I think it would be a good conversation for us to have privately one-on-one. Are you free for a phone call at whatever time? So is this something that other people are doing, having private interactions? Roman?
I'm perhaps a little bit more conservative in that I wait, Annie, for the student to write something in their supervision blog about the interaction in the group, and then I can offer them some feedback or try and develop an opportunity to go into greater detail with the student in a discussion that would be offline. So that might be another option.
How do people find students are using blogs? Are they painting themselves in the best light? Are they using it as a way to have a little dig? Are they honest in their reflections? I think they're a really good idea, but as with anything, are they completely transparent and honest, or is it always about showing oneself in the best possible light? I go into blogs every now and again if there's an issue, and that's part of my access in the confidentiality loop, and I'm really not interested in reading the blogs of 300 students a term, but I will look in when something comes up, and every now and again I've been quite disturbed by manipulative, passive-aggressive comments. So where do people see, how do people see the students using blogs? Yeah, I'll go to Roman first and then Karen.
Yeah, one of the things about the blogs is that I do spend some time in the first session with the students explaining to them what deep learning is, and in particular how the blogs are important in terms of the actual essays that they have to write, and make it very clear what deep learning is as opposed to simply writing a description of what they heard in the supervision, yeah? I mean, we all are trying, I hope, to get the students to be reflecting on what has actually occurred in the supervision, rather than simply writing about so-and-so said this and then the supervisor said that and I didn't like what was going on, none of that, for them to start asking that question why. So by really introducing what my expectation is about the blogs, it hopefully, and in the majority of cases, does allow them to use it as part of the deep reflection that I'm hoping then to read in their actual essays. Thank you.
Yeah, your mic's on now, Karen.
All right. Okay. I'm just thinking of, and maybe this just adds a bit to what Roman says as another possible sort of strategy. And I've done this a couple of times, and I think I might do it more often. Is a couple of times I've actually summarised the themes of what the students have written about in their blogs for a week. Yeah, these were the organisational themes that came up, or these seem to be the client themes that came up. And what I've found when I've presented those back to the students as a group, that's actually helped them engage with the blogs. And I've done that a couple of times, and the feedback I've got is that they found that useful. So I'm sort of going to make a bit of a commitment to myself to put in that extra effort to do that, because I think that makes the blogs more meaningful for them. And they recognise, one, that I've read them, and two, that there are themes that come up, and it helps me draw theoretical links and get them engaged. So I think that's another way maybe of making use of the blogs, and a lot of them are tokenistic as well. I'm doing this because I need to do it, and that's true. So maybe that other strategy mitigates against that a bit.
Okay, I've just put your microphone on now, Enza. Do you want to have a chat about the point that you've just typed into the text box?
You've unmuted me. Have
Yeah.
you unmuted me?
Yeah.
I just find they're way too long, and often the students are using them as between sessions to actually write about a serious issue that might have come up during placement. It might be about their supervisor or their on placement or their case, a particular case. And there is the expectation that we're, freely available to read that. So by the time they come to their group session, they're going, oh, when I wrote this, and I go, yeah, but I'm not on blogs all the time. I don't know what's actually happened. And so that's the only problem. I think that, and how I've got around that is I'm actually really using that first session. I've got my little list of rules for the first session. This is what you're going to get from me. I'm not going to be reading blogs between every day. I don't work for ACAP every day. That's not my role. I think they still have this expectation that we're ACAP employed.
Yeah.
And that we're logging in every day and we're reading all their material, and so I make it really clear about what my role is going to be in terms of reading the blogs, the sort of feedback they're going to get on the blogs, what they're going to get in terms of the group work when they do present, my expectation of them, the timekeeping stuff. I'm much more rigid now. I wasn't initially. I was very nice, and now I'm not so nice. I'm really much more clearer. I'm not unpleasant, but I'm really clear about this is my expectation, as I would like in a, because I expect them to be professional. So if they're turning up late, or they're half an hour late, and then they're complaining about they're caught up in the traffic or they're caught up in the rain, but they're expecting to still be heard very quickly. It's kind of like I have to kind of say, well, that's not going to happen. And I do that all in the beginning, right in the first session. So I think I spend nearly an hour really setting up the rules, and then I don't have any. I think that then sets up, for me, I've had no problems ever since I've done that. And all the complaints that students might have with each other and the way they speak to each other, I do all that in that first session. And I will say things like, if I'm concerned about your tone of voice, I'm going to use a chat and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to say, please, can we tone it down? So I'd say all that in the beginning. And I don't seem to have any issue afterwards. I do it in a very nice way, very clear.
Furiously scrolling notes.
Yeah, and I think that my problem is that they write far too much, and I think that especially more the postgraduate students, they're using that as, I think they still use the blogs as if to indicate how skilled they are, rather than it being a rule for reflection. Does that make sense? So, they're kind of trying to suggest that they're really good at CBT or they're really good at, and that's, so I kind of try to frame it a bit like what Roman was saying. It's much more reflective exercise about you and the experience, rather than using them as, for me to judge or to be assessed.
I'm not sure if other people are picking this up, but if students are writing huge amount of blogs, is that indicative of their being, is that a really engaged student, or is that someone trying to get a point across? Because I have noticed with some of our difficult ones, they write screeds. Is it a one-off, or because I don't see all of them, I really only bother looking when there's an issue, and I have noticed that we're asking for 150 to 300 words. I've had some who've written like 1,700 words a week. Is this just their chance to vent? In which case, I think it's an appropriate use of the blogs. I've unmuted your mic, Diane.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things that I picked up from what people are saying. First of all, just to say that when I set up the blogs, I too make a point that it's not a method of communication between myself and the supervisees, and that if we're going to actually have a communication, that we'll do that by email or in person. So that's one thing I always say, like ends up. And the other thing is that I often have to distinguish between a personal diary and a professional reflective blog, so that they get the idea of what the sort of boundaries that do apply to reflecting professionally, as opposed to an event that happens in a personal diary. So that's another thing that I kind of bring up with them. But as far as, I think in the blogs, though, I do want them to also reflect on the things they are doing well, because I think some of them can be very self-critical. And I really want to hear them saying what they're doing well, and then that is something that they can use, as quotes, as they're expected to in their essays. So I do encourage that as well. And also, I've also found that some of the students who are doing very long posts, I've had students whose workplace supervision hasn't been adequate for them. So I've found that those students are also making very long entries sometimes into the blogs, because they're using it as a way of self-supervision. And for me, that's okay, I think. So I guess it just depends on the purpose behind their long entries. So.
Yeah, should we be curtailing long entries and encouraging parsimonious reflection? Or should we be saying, sure, go for it, but bear in mind, I'm not going to be reading it because it's not your way of communicating with me? I'm not really sure what the answer to that is. Roman?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at it on a case-by-case basis. There's some students that you'll want to encourage and help in their development, and there'll be other students that you have other views of and might be able to assist them in other ways. So I like some of Diane's ideas, but again, though, for me personally, it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Sorry, I had muted myself there. I'll come to you in just a moment, Renee. I think a really important thing which Diane and both Enza highlighted was setting expectations at the start of term, letting them know this is not your diary, that you know that mum's going to be secretly reading behind your back, even though that's what you really want her to be doing. Making sure that you know that it should be that they know that it should be professionally presented at all times, and that you're really only going to go in if you need to have a look at how they're presenting the work that they're doing, either with you or with the clients. I think a lot of problems in any classroom situation can be set up, alleviated in the first week with good setup. And that's a lot of what we talked about on the professional day on campus today. That was awkward. Letting students know in terms of assessments what they want, letting them know in terms of participation what they want, and that's whether it's an academic unit, the sort that I teach, or supervision, which is much more relational and intuitive. Even though it is relational and intuitive, there's still a structure that the students need to be working within. And I think making it really clear right from the start is possibly going to circumvent some of those problems. We have talked a couple of times before about using part of that initial week where you're setting up how we're going to work together over the rest of the term, creating a contract. In the previous PD session I did with the supervisors, someone didn't like the term contract. They found it too rigid, so they just referred to it as group agreements. And everyone agreed that this is how we are going to behave. We're not going to talk over each other. We're going to realize that sometimes the feedback that we get is going to be challenging, and we will, we'll live with that. We'll work with that. We're not going to lose our temper. We're going to turn up on time. All of that, all of the basic group stuff, but also the overlay, which is particularly relevant to supervision, as in being self-aware. Again, one of the other supervisors had a really clever, simple technique, and she said, as part of the group agreement, I would like your permission to take notes as we work. I take notes when I'm working with my clients, and I'd like permission to keep notes on how the sessions are going. And that way, she wasn't doing it in a way of saying, and therefore I'm going to have a brief of evidence against you when this comes to court. She was just saying, that way everyone knows that I'm documenting what's happening. And it will be noted if you raise your voice, and it will be noted if you tell me to F off. And so by making it part of that initial session, you're getting permission from them. You're not saying, this is what I do and you must agree. You ask them, are you comfortable with me doing this? Because it allows me to reflect on the work that we're doing. Once they all agree to that, then you can bring that back to them later on in the term and say, well, you remember we all agreed in the first session that, yep, this is going to get maybe heated, and maybe you're going to feel a bit insecure about your skills. But we also said that together, by the end of the term, we would be working towards this shiny, happy future. So the idea of a contract / group agreement can help ground the expectations, can maybe alleviate some of those issues that come up. And it just sets up the structure. I'm not sure if it was Enza or Diane who mentioned the word tone. Tone is so subjective, and yet you all know what tone sounds like when you get it from a supervisee. I think putting something as clear as that in and saying, there are times when I'll question what you've said with the client. There are times that I'll question your understanding of a theory or a modality. And there are times when I'm going to ask you to consider how you're speaking to me. So again, making it really clear up front, letting people know that this is going to be, this is the hardest unit of your degree. I really think they are, because it's combining that academic knowledge with an attempt to create a professional persona and all of their background baggage that comes along, and they're expected to be a counsellor by the end of it. Just acknowledging that, yes, this is going to be hard, but it is something that you will get through. I think factoring that into the group agreement can be quite useful. I'm aware that I'm doing an awful lot of talking here, which is, I guess, what I quite like doing. But yes, I'd like to hear. So, okay, your microphone's now on, Charlene.
Paul, I was just going to add as well, over the years, what I've found is the students making that transition from coming in, like you said, I always facilitate on campus, and they sort of struggle between moving from being an academic unit as a student to what it means to be a supervisee. So we often need to spend a bit of time as well on talking about what is supervision and exploring that. And I talk about, some of the different models and how I'm going to approach it, and really explore with them what their understanding is of supervision and the roles and responsibilities of each party. And that has helped, I found, as well, in just making them feel a bit more comfortable with what the process will entail and what it is that they need to do as a supervisor versus being an academic student. And also revisiting in the following session, I'd often give feedback on the blogs, and I guess it's a little bit easier on campus if there's any issues with the student. I sort of will raise that with them individually straight after class if there's that immediacy around exploring what's just gone on. So yeah, from an on-campus perspective, I found meeting with them after class and also spending time around what it is, what supervision is, and what the roles are as a supervisor has helped.
I think one of the problematic things that the school hasn't quite got its head around yet is how to teach supervisees what supervision is. We just sort of drop them into it, and there are readings that we hope that they'll do, and they don't a lot of the time. We don't actually have a unit that says this is what supervision is, and you're going to go and do it with Charlene in a small group next term. It's just learn it while it happens. And I think it's almost setting them up for failure. I think using that first week, as well as the ground rules and as well as expectations around performance and attitude, I think the idea is saying, this is the model that I use. Renee and I had a discussion about this today, and she was saying she knows someone who's been using a 5P model, and now she's going to use the 7I model. So, what are the roles there? Well, you say, this is what I use, and I find it beneficial in this way. Another supervisor will use another model, and you'll learn different things from them. Now, I'm aware that you had your hand up, Renee, so I've unmuted you if you want to say what you were going to say earlier.
Hi, Paul. I had massive technical issues coming on this evening. So I guess my main question was related to, and I know we'll talk about the other question I had earlier offline, but it's related to the blog. And it's more about, is there an expectation of it being a stream of consciousness almost, or they can just do almost whatever they like? Is there no kind of parameter around that?
I'm going to let anyone who wants to answer that. Hi, Gina.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. You're here. I've got a recording, so I will send that through, and you'll be able to hear the first half of this at your leisure. Quite a few people have had issues getting in, so thank you for persevering. Who would like to talk about what they think is best in a blog? Should it be a mind dump? Should it be structured? What do you think gives students the best? Because I can't answer that because I don't do it. Do you want to go, Roman?
Sure. Or maybe Karen, would you like to go?
maybe we can add to each other's, Roman. But what I was just going to say off the top of my head is that really the purpose of blogs is reflective practice. What is reflective practice? Reflective practice is, you know, what do my clients bring to me? What do I bring to them? What theoretical concept can we, you know, put this in? And, you know, how do we move forward? So to me, blogging is about reflective practice and, you know, the coming together of, you know, the theory of counselling and psychotherapy with, you know, what we do in real life. So that for me is the purpose, and drawing those connections between who we are as and how things are affecting us and our work, and vice versa. So over to you, Roman, to add, please.
That's great. That's a great introduction. Thanks, Karen, because I actually, I sort of used Bloom's taxonomy, and I actually show them how Bloom's taxonomy filters down into deep learning, or rather how they can start writing about their own internalized experience. So that's exactly what Karen is talking about. But I actually give them some examples of what I'm expecting, and then that makes it incredibly clear. As for a stream of consciousness, well, that might be what they're into, but I'm more interested in asking specific questions which are part of the Bloom's taxonomy. You can easily go on the internet and look for questions, Bloom's taxonomy, and you'll find what I'm talking about. Thanks.
Yeah.
Melanie?
I was just going to add just quickly to that, just to say I like to see in the blogs, you know, what they feel that they're doing well, and what they feel that they need to work on. To me, that's part of helping this client, and what do I need to learn more about? What are my gaps in learning? What are my weaknesses? What do I need to learn more about? So, you know, so do I need to do more reading on this? Do I need to practice this skill more? In order to continue that learning through reflective practice, and that hopefully they continue to do that post-study, you know, whilst they're in the field, that they can continue to reflect on that throughout. So, yeah, that's how I see a blog. But, you know, more often than not, what I see on a blog is exactly what they presented during supervision. So to me, it's like, oh, it's just, I know this bit. I know this already. You know, you already told me this.
So you think they're being quite transparent in what they are typing up?
Yeah. I see it as, well, they've done a case presentation and then they just present that in the client bit. And then they just tell me what happened during supervision, which is what I know as well. You know, what I want to know is what they struggled with, what was their personal issues in relation to that, you know, where did they stumble, how do they be vulnerable in that too, in saying, yeah, I really screwed that up, you know, or I really don't feel like I know this area very well at all, you know, how do I work on that? What will I do to overcome that?
See, I think that's where the deep learning can really flesh out in a personal development sense, when they say, I got that wrong, and this is what I might try and do next time.
But certainly celebrate what they did well too.
Oh yeah,
I did really well here, but over here,
if everything is I did really well on this.
Yeah,
this,
that's right.
This, you know, if there's
or not even what was good or bad, just this is what I did.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
okay. Well, that's an important point, because sometimes students just give description when they're supposed to be reflecting. And this happened, then this happened, then this happened, doesn't really tell us about what happened internally, or how you felt, or how
that relationship
might be perceived. A lot of the professional development day was looking at the role of feedback. So we do have the marking matrices that we use, and one thing that was really important that came up from some research that Jenny Coburn sent through from Melbourne, and that was that whatever marking criteria the students are working through, you need to be able to identify in the essay that they have done it. So it's not just a matter of ticking off that they understand theories or that they have worked ethically. Try and work that into the feedback that you put in the comments along the side of the essay to say, this is a really good examination of how you understand this particular theory. This is a good demonstration of these particular skills that you said you were going to work towards. We've got one paper that's getting remarked at the moment, and the student's saying, but I did all of those things. I know I have been ticked off on all of those criteria. And we've had to go back to him and say, yes, you've ticked them off, but it's really, you've just dropped a keyword in. And there's no, we aren't able to say that you've done this and you've analysed your understanding of this. I think his background is actually he's studied at a vet level before and he's used to being able to tick off competencies, but he's not able to show critical or reflective thinking. And by factoring in that into the feedback that you're giving, particularly in written work, that can help the student know what they're doing right, what they need to improve on, but it also makes it a lot harder for them to challenge it. And the other thing that came up very strongly was the need for very positive language in how feedback is delivered. And then we had this big argument about, how do you give really positive feedback to someone who just can't do it? Do we need to pad the message out with so many nice things about, wow, I'm glad you used 12-point Roman times typeface. That made it so easy to read. Pity there was no content there.
Yeah.
We are about trying to upskill people, but also get them to feel confident to learn themselves. But the flip side to that is sometimes you do need to tell people you just didn't do that well. And the challenge is, how do you say that without crushing their spirit?
But even better if they can say it themselves. I didn't do that well,
Look, if they say that in an essay.
Yeah, it's great.
And I have read somewhere where students say, well, that was a disaster. And by the last 2 weeks, I actually understood what case conceptualization was, but it's taken me until halfway through the second supervision unit to actually get it. Now, I'm aware that it is nearly 8:30 and I've now been here for about 12 and a half hours. And I've got another late night tomorrow. So do you mind if we wrap up at this point? We're pretty much at the hour, unless there's anything.
Can I ask a really quick question while my mic's still off?
Sure.
I just wanted to ask about the timing of supervision sessions. I noticed that a couple of years ago we used to have daytime sessions and now they've sort of all dropped away. They're all nighttime.
Yeah, the majority.
And often students seem really tired, at that time, less engaged.
Yeah. My understanding of that is that it's student driven. That we've had classes on through the day and they get very low population.
Okay.
So, I mean, personally, I would rather that we had a range across the day and the weekends, but we just tend to fill the evening classes, which makes timetabling very difficult because we have a limited number of supervisors.
Well, I find the 2-hour classes are good in the evening, but the 3-hour ones are usually better in the day. Yeah, it's really late and they're tired and they're like, can we finish?
That's understandable. It's a long day for them and they are long, grueling classes at times. Okay, well look, it's now 8:30. And I have a large martini waiting for me, but I have about a 40-minute drive to get home before I get that. Thank you, ACAP. You're giving me a cab charge tonight. I don't have to spend 75 minutes on the damn train. Thank you, lovely people. It's good to see you again. For any who did have trouble getting in or hearing or whatever, I'm going to download this. I'll upload it onto my YouTube channel and I'll send you the link. So if you missed any of it or you couldn't hear or you got in late because of technical issues, which bedevil us all occasionally, it will all be there. So thank you for your time. Please make contact with your supervisees to say, hey, term starts next week. This is me. looking forward to meeting you and have a great time with them. See you then.
Thank you. And if any of the supervisors could stand for a second, I just had a few quick questions, but I'll let Paul go. Just really simple ones.
Okay, fine. And then, actually, no, I will wait just because I need to turn the recording off. But I'll just.
Oh, no, don't worry. Don't worry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll just.
Okay, well, I'll let everybody go. If I could ask Paul very quickly, is that the new log-on page? It seems to have changed its format. Am I on the wrong page?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Okay.
It's the one I
So
use.
I don't have any classes loaded yet. So
no, they'll go up tomorrow.
Are they going to load tomorrow?
No,
okay, lovely.
Go
okay.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Fantastic.
That's it.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Yep.
See you next time.
Outstanding, Paul.
You too, Karen, always.